In this presentation, we're going to be looking at the direct aftermath of World War II. And I do want to take a moment to kind of point out that if we look at the big picture of World War II, it was such an important moment in history that we're still impacted by much of the aftermath of World War II today. However, what we're going to be looking at are the specific things that happened either right towards the end of the war or after the war that would influence the direction the world would move into. So let's start in Yalta. In February of 1945, the Big Three, Winston Churchill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Joseph Stalin, would meet in Yalta with victory within their sights. So to make sure you understand who these men are, Winston Churchill was the Prime Minister of Great Britain. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the President of the United States, and Joseph Stalin was the leader of the USSR, the Soviet Union. And these men are going to meet in Yalta in order to make decisions regarding post-war policies and reparations that needed to be made at the end of the war. And the decisions they came to was that they were going to divide Austrian Germany into zones of military occupation, and Berlin would be divided into 4 parts. Eastern European countries became a major topic of discussion. The Soviet Union had already taken control of most of these Eastern European countries because they bordered the USSR. And so they wanted to maintain that control over these countries. Yet Churchill and Roosevelt felt that each of these nations should be allowed to decide its own future. And so this discussion over the fate of Eastern European countries is really looking at this communist nation of the Soviet Union and these democratic Western countries of Great Britain and the United States, and they're just clashing in the way they feel the Eastern European countries should kind of move. One thinks they should move into the communistic area, and Stalin wants control of that, and Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt feel like they should have a choice. So Stalin promises at this time in Yalta, he promises to allow free elections. And because he promises this, Churchill and Roosevelt will agree that the Eastern European countries should be friendly to the Soviet Union because they will be neighbors with the Soviet Union. So once the war finally ends, they actually have to kind of finalize a lot of other decisions and plans for the post-war. And they're going to meet in Potsdam after Germany surrenders. So while they're there, the decisions that are made was that Germany should remain a single country, though for a time it would be divided and demilitarized. The Nazi Party must be outlawed. German political structure should be rebuilt on a democratic basis, and people who committed war crimes would be brought to trial. So those are the core decisions that were made. But what actually kind of comes out of Potsdam isn't necessarily a settling of what to do as part of the surrender process and what to do at the end of the war. What kind of comes out of this meeting is that the divisions between the communist Soviet Union and the Western democracies is going to grow and become more evident. The Soviet Union is going to demand a change in the Polish borders, and it will take land from Germany. They also demand reparations in the form of industrial equipment, which greatly hurts Germany's ability to reestablish itself. So the idea was that even though things were going to be happening to Germany, slowly people would remove themselves, other countries would remove themselves from Germany so Germany can get back on its feet and still remain a country. That would require that their economy be able to rebound from the war. The Soviet Union's not that worried about this. And what they want is they feel like they should be paid for the amount of destruction that the Soviet Union experienced. And one of the things it does is take payment from Germany through the form of industrial equipment. And that means that Germany's industries cannot rebuild as easily or reestablish themselves as quickly as was hoped. But the big piece and takeaway from here is that the Soviet Union is really going to start butting heads with these Western democracies, especially the United States. If you remember, one of the decisions that come from Potsdam is that war crimes were going to be punished. So this happens at the Nuremberg Trials. After the war, the full horror of German concentration camps are going to come to light, what we call the Holocaust. And the brutal, systematic executions of millions of Jewish people are going to come to light. So in 1945 and 1946, a special international court met in Nuremberg, Germany, to try 22 Nazi leaders with war crimes. 12 of these Nazi leaders will be sentenced to death. 7 were sentenced to life in prison, and 3 were actually acquitted. At this time, the court will also declare that the Nazi Party is a criminal organization. So a big, huge takeaway as part of the aftermath of World War II is the creation of the United Nations. And this talk actually started in Yalta before World War II even ended, where the nations were, the big three talked about the need for a creation of an international peacekeeping organization. Roosevelt will feel it was very necessary, while Churchill and Stalin wanted more to do spheres of influence, where they're going to kind of divide the world up, and this is my sphere of influence, this is yours. And so they figured that then the superpowers of the world could just kind of police those areas. But because we have the United Nations today, instead of having those spheres of influence, the United Nations will be created. And in April of 1945, representatives from 51 nations met to agree on the Charter for the United Nations. By October, enough nations ratified the Charter to create the UN with the primary purpose of maintaining international peace and security. It would foster international cooperation to solve cultural, economic, and social problems. The UN is still functioning today, and this need for an international organization isn't just about peacekeeping. This need for the United Nations and this international organization really shows how far civilization has come. We went from these small agricultural communities into these large nation states, into these massive empires. And after the world wars were fought, they realized the world is global, and we need an organization that helps us interact in an effective way with other nations.